Hello, Brobs. This is a little experiment since I've cleaned this room out, which had some moisture exposure in the basement. So the acoustics sound rather good right now. I want to see how good it does sound after all. Usually I pick books on here to read that are not covered. This one, I don't know what it's about, but I'm pretty sure it's about lesbians. My Sister, My Beloved, the most startling novel you'll ever read by Edwina Mark. I say it's about lesbians because through the perfumed aisles of Lesbos, the thousands of readers of the well of loneliness, loveliest of friends, Diana, and we too are drifting, will welcome this exciting and unforgettable book. Written with great distinction and sensitive understanding, it is the story of strong and evil passions, but also of love. Love. With unerring sensitivity and tact, the author takes the reader into the violent, fevered world of 22-year-old Eve, who didn't know where she belonged, and of her beautiful 16-year-old half-sister Sheila, who did. The tragic relationship between the two girls and their sadistic alcoholic mother builds up to a heart-gripping climax that will leave you breathless. All right. Sounds in the night. Eve, can I come into your bed a minute? I'm lonely. I went hot, then cold. But Sheila didn't have any idea, I realized, of what was going on inside me. She was in bad trouble. I was her friend, her sister. All right, I said. For a minute, Sheila climbed in carefully. I turned around. Her nightdress had caught in the sheets and had hiked itself. Oh my God. She put her arms around me and held me tight. I could feel her burning body pressed against mine. Her thighs were like two flames against my legs. Don't cry, honey, I said. My voice was shaking and every nerve was screaming for release. In this, her first novel, Edwina Mark explores with simplicity and delicacy the torturous bypaths of an odd and compelling relationship. I don't know how much of this can go on to the internet. The moon has set, and the Pleiades. It is the middle of the night, and time passes, and I lie alone. Sappho, circa 600 BC. Berkeley Publishing Corps, New York City. Second printing, July 1958. The characters and situations in this story are wholly fictitious and imaginary and do not portray and are not intended to portray an actual person or any actual persons or parties. One, I told the cabbie to let me off at the corner of 74th and 5th Avenue. That left me with a 3-block walk to the apartment. We were in the midst of a heat wave, and my dress had gathered up the steam of the day around me. The driver let me off at his convenience. I had to cross 5th to get to the Parkside. Once I was there, I walked slowly past the wooden benches, with the lovers silent and huddled together, listening to their own voices or just sitting in the warm darkness. I stopped by a lamp and looked at my watch. 11:15. The July night had barely begun to cool off. The park breathed silently, and there was just the whisper of wind. I took my time. I didn't like to go home to the vast, hot apartment. When I finally turned into the lobby, the night doorman shook his head at me. I knew what he meant. Sheila wasn't home yet. Neither was she, of course. The building had decided to save money, and the elevator was self-operated now. I closed the door and pressed the button marked 15. Then I turned and looked in the goddamn mirror. I'd lived here for 12 years, and I'd always hated the mirror in the back of the elevator car. A full-length glass ornately filigreed in gold leaf. It had always looked incongruous. The only rococo touch in the crystal and glass functionalism. When I was a little girl, my mother always made me turn and look at myself. I could almost hear her voice behind me, low, dramatic, a thin edge of mockery and impatience cutting through the velvet. Please do something about your hair, Eve. It makes your face look even uglier than it is. That had been when I was 14. Every time I looked at myself after that, a knife went through me. Every time mother criticized my appearance, that knife turned in my vitals. From the mirror, my face stared back at me, long and bony. The dress clung to my armpits. I never could master the trick of being calm and cool and fresh in the New York summer. My sister Sheila can do that. But when it's hot, I look hot. The elevator stopped. Still feeling sorry for myself, I opened the door to 15A. It was dark inside. The air conditioning unit had been left on in my mother's bedroom and was purring away to itself. I could hear it from behind the locked door. My mother always locked her room when she went out. I knew it would be cool, almost cold. The specially fitted door, with its soft rubber gaskets, didn't allow 1 cubic centimeter of cool air to escape. But the living room was hot as hell. I turned on the light and opened the windows. The humming heat was almost alive. There was nothing in the icebox except some of my mother's vodka in a water pitcher. I hadn't been fooled by that since the day 6 months ago when I'd taken what I thought was a drink of cold water and thought my stomach was burning up. I found some orange juice finally and mixed myself a screwdriver. It was too hot to go to sleep. I switched on the TV. The channel I turned to was playing an old picture. The bright eye of the set with the miniature actors passing and repassing on its surface like black and white marionettes seemed to make the room hotter than it was. I turned it off and leaned back on the couch, trying not to think. But there was Sheila. I wondered where she was. She'd had this date for 2 weeks, but it had been a big secret. You'd think a girl like Sheila, so pretty and so young, she was just 16, with a sweetness that had not yet begun to curdle, wouldn't have to plan a date 2 weeks in advance. But mother had never let her go out. I was safe. No boy would look at me. And by now, at 22, I was so used to it that if one had, I don't think I would have known what to do. The way I'd been brought into Sheila's romance wasn't exactly new to me. She'd always enlisted me on her side against my mother ever since she'd been old enough to make up her own mind about things. This often meant that I had to be Sheila's scapegoat. Once, 5 years ago, she was only 11 then, she'd gone with me to the house of my English teacher. I'd taken her along to his apartment on Riverside Drive. A lot of my friends were there. Rainier's parties, he held them 2 or 3 times a year, were famous. He was a tall, stooped man with iron gray hair, his big black suit tight over his shoulder blades, outlining the small hump there. Sheila sat by my side, wide black eyes, taking in the scene, the real fire in the fireplace, and Dr. Rayner stretched out in front of it. It was good talk for a high school crowd, innocent and wondering, and full of life. Sheila, separated from my classmates by the insurmountable divide between 11 and 17, sat very quiet. I don't remember what Dr. Rayner was reading. Shakespeare, I think, or Herrick. But I do remember that at one point I turned my head and for the first time I really saw Sheila. She'd always been like quicksilver in the hand to me, elusive and yet graceful. She was good at the things I was poor at. At 11, she had more natural poise than I have now or ever will have. Now, with her attention caught in Dr. Rainier's measured voice, striving to grasp ideas that were too big for her couched in words she had not known existed. She looked almost unearthly. I remember thinking to myself, this is how Titiana would look were you to catch her unaware, sleeping on a rose petal. I loved her from that day on. 3 days later, we signed a pact in blood. Yes, girls do such things too. To be really and truly sisters, even though we were only half sisters. That was after that night. Oh no. This is going to devolve into something debauched. Anyway, that's all for now.